The more evidence, the better, I say.
I mean, this is so improbable.
That's a bold statement.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I didn't make that argument. He did.
Why is that true? Is that a good question? Maybe it's not.
Drew, you're not supposed to ask good questions like
Sorry,
that.
sorry.
Don't ask difficult questions.
Bill, jump in here.
I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic.
You're listening to The Divide. Well, welcome back to The Divide. Today we interview Derek Lambert from MythVision, who is an exvangelical, which has now become a kind of term of trade, where there's this exodus of millennials out of evangelical Christianity, and I think his journey represents what has become a common experience for many young Christians, and so I think you'll be interested to hear that. We talk about dogmatism at various times today. Is there dogmatism in both the Christian and religious and non-religious world? And we also have a pretty interesting discussion about transgenderism versus young earth creationism. So I hope you enjoy the interview. All right, well, welcome back to The Divide. We have with us Derek Lambert from MythVision today. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you for inviting me.
And so we'd like you to maybe just start, by the way, by explaining what MythVision is.
MythVision is a podcast that started out while I was going through my deconversion process. I was looking at things that are kind of taboo and areas that aren't really discussed, especially the evangelical world. Your pastor won't talk about them. And lots of things that didn't make sense that I started finding as I was studying online. In fact, it was things like Manly Pete Hall, Masonic esotericist and things like that really went, hold on, the Samson story? What's it really talking about? And I started to dive deep into these esoteric people as I was leaving what we would call Orthodox Christianity. And in that process, began to realize, hold on, maybe I don't even know what I'm looking at. And neither do the people who've been teaching all of these things. So MythVision has started to document academics and showing the process. And I think the greatest discovery, as Bart Ehrman recently said on his Genesis series that he has his online courses, I've been help pitching for him and stuff to get interviews with him. He said the greatest discovery is not the Qumran scrolls. It's not the Nag Hammadi library, even though those are amazing discoveries. It's the fact that the Bible is not one book, not written by one author, and that these books don't even belong, written in different times, places, with different ideas, different theological point of views, sometimes contradictory views. Once you realize that, and you have to compartmentalize these things, that's when you realize the greatest discovery. And MythVision has been trying to kind of center the name myth and vision to view. People think I have some Illuminati, there's the eye, all this stuff, crazy conspiracies. No, I want to look at the mythology. I want to look at the legend. I want to look at the fiction, because I've always believed this is literal, historical truth.
All right, so thank you for that. So the question today, I guess we're really going to discuss is what is this phenomenon, exvangelicalism? I see this term a lot. So what is exvangelicalism, and then how does your story fit into that?
As you and I talked before the show, I don't know the technical definition, what that may be, but it sounds like someone who was an evangelical and they have exited. So let's just call that an exvangelical. I was an evangelical fundamentalist Christian most of my life. I can't say I didn't have a belief or faith in Jesus, because I was kind of trained growing up with a Pentecostal mother, a Catholic dad who didn't really practice. Every third word was a cuss word. He's military, and taught me to be tough, all that. Skipping ahead, as I grew up, Mom would kind of dangle religion with all-you-can-eat buffet if you come to church. And of course, I'm an eater, so church it is. And I go to church, and next thing you know, I'm believing in Jesus because my father's an alcoholic. I dealt with the traumas of addiction in my life. I went through it myself. I won't get lost in this, but I might make reference to it. But my father being an alcoholic, and I love him, he is my hero. I did my senior project on my father. I had pictures all over the poster board of him wearing his BDUs, sometimes downrange in war zones, and he's got his AR or he's got his weapon on him, and I'm like, that's my father, and I love my father. Like, he, to this day, is my hero. Well, I went to church. They talked about Father God, this God who would never let you down and never let you, he will never forsake you, and even to the end of the age that Jesus talks about. They're preaching these things, and they finally hit this button psychologically and emotionally for me where you don't have to worry. You know, your parents in this world will let you down, but there's a Father who won't. And it was a comforting message. There was no empirical, scientific, let me explain to you and prove to you that this is true with scientific data. And no, they had a message that I related as a human being, a young kid in middle school. I was in a private middle school that was a Christian one. And that is the first time I remember actually asking Jesus to take over, to rule my life, and to become his child, to join in the family of God. And I felt a warm, comforting sensation in my stomach. I felt like I was part of something greater than myself, and I was deeply invested to the point where many years I started to get even more serious into it. When trials came up, I had a friend, a comforter by myself I could talk to, and I did. And trust me, trials came. From children to marriage to drug addiction to my father's alcoholism to my brother to you name it, life happens, and I had Jesus. Skipping ahead, I'm now married. I've got kids. I was a little bit of a Jesus freak in high school. Like, I carried my Bible everywhere. I studied my Bible. I challenged other Christians who had disagreeing theological positions. And then my wife and girls and babies and life kind of distracts you, but it's still there. And then you come back. I was going to church, and I was part of this house church. Really cutting it quick here to give you the whole shenanigan that happens. But this church was KJV onlyist. We spoke in tongues. We had a woman pastor, like every no-no to a Baptist. And we went all out heretical, but I didn't know that was heresy. It was the first Bible studies, reading the Bible, which I did read the whole Bible, Genesis to Revelation, in God's Word, the King James. And I started getting used to the poetic phrases. I actually still love it to this day. He who is without sin cast the first stone. No, your regular English translations have like, if you're without sin, pick up a stone and throw it. No. He who is without sin. So really devout, and I'm speaking in tongues. In fact, they taught me that speaking in tongues is what Paul did, the earliest Christians did. Paul said he spoke in tongues more than all of them. So it was gibberish. This is the way I learned it. Got really into that. And again, life, distractions, addictions, problems. I'm poor. I got to work hard. I'm working with my hands to feed my family, my kids. So distractions caused me to come back. When I came back, I got into another church, Calvary Chapel. I wanted to ground myself. I realized it was really nutty. Some of the things I was into, looking at the rest of everything that I lived in the world, it looked really odd. Even my wife was like, I was really wondering what's wrong. You're doing this. And I'm like, this is weird, she said. And it just is not normal, honey. So I start looking into this, and I'm like, okay, maybe those gifts ceased. Found versions of Christianity that made these arguments theologically that those gifts did cease, and there was cessationism. It happened in the first century. Man, I can go on about theology and just go everywhere, but I won't waste your time doing it. I just want you to know, I really wanted to know. So when you really want to know, you investigate. When you really want to know, sometimes you draw conclusions along your way because you're not holding to the truth that you already have, and then you're trying to go out of the world to prove your truth that you already have. That's not inquiry. And they would tell me, Derek, you go to and fro. You're like the wind that blows you to and fro. You're not really grounded in the truth. And I'm thinking to myself, but I know like way more about all of this than this person. And they're going to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm the guy who's going to and fro just because I'm not gullible and I don't accept what I'm told. Like,
these were
no.
people
And I'm a
in your
believer
church that were rebuking you, I guess, for sort of changing your opinion about certain things. Okay.
And I always have changed, even like I do today.
Gotcha.
And I think it's a good philosophy to have. I think anybody, who knows, one day I might become a theist. I say that up front. You never know that. I don't know that. I'm serious. I'm open-minded to the idea.
But it's interesting. I've heard you tell this story before, and it's interesting how you basically kind of found the Christianity that you could that would make the most sense to you before leaving it behind. And I did the same thing. I actually sort of took on a lot of like Calvinistic tulip ideas, because it was like, well, it's hard for me to make sense of these things unless you take on this. And then the what I took on became worse than the sort of not knowing before. So I sympathize with that kind of journey.
I mean, keeping in mind, the one thing I knew that was true was that experience that I had in that church that day. That's what I knew to be true. So all of the stuff that can move around in your head, the theology, the details, you can move it anywhere you want. But what I experienced was true. Even to this day, what I experienced as an atheist was true. But just like Darren Brown does, the well-known mentalist, he takes an atheist and converts her in 15 minutes. If you haven't seen it, you really should. She starts to cry. Now, she doesn't know he's an atheist. She thinks he believes in a power greater than us and there's a God and all of that. But he taps into what she actually knows, which is her mother and her father, her sisters, her family. He taps into these real things that we experience. And then he organized them in such a way, in this way, that it was just one step further. Assuming agency beyond oneself is just people think it's so far. It's really not. It's really simple. In fact, I always wonder, and I'm just guessing, getting back into my story, is when language developed, when we learned language and we could hear our voice in our own heads, did we think it was us? Or did we think this was God? And I always ask that question. Steven Pinker and others who talk about the development of language. It makes me wonder, did we think that was the gods? The voice in our head talking? Now we know it's us in our heads speaking to ourselves, kind of having this self-talk. But no, maybe we thought these were deities or something. Hard to know. Moving on, I go from that Calvary Chapel, and there's a pastor there who actually, I don't know why I'm saying this, but got caught sleeping with members of the church. He was attracted to the women there, and the wife was really insecure, because I remember one day she told my wife, will you please you need to wear something longer than that. She came to tell my wife this. Maybe she saw her husband looking at my wife and I didn't notice or something. I don't know. But long story short, he misquoted something from the Bible, and then I knew that he was wrong. But I went up to him after. I didn't correct him like everyone else would love to do to me. I'd go, how do I learn more about the Bible to become a pastor like you? Because I thought maybe I'm called to do this. He said, go down to this college I went to, Carolina Bible College. I went. I signed up. Got a government help. I didn't have the money to do this. But I got the government to help me, FAFSA or whatever it's called, and I went and actually started taking courses in theology, got my associate's degree in biblical studies. Taking theology serious, I became a Calvinist. Well, hold on. You just said you weren't a Calvinist. Hold on. You were arguing against it. I know. I used to argue against Calvinists who convinced me, using the Bible-specific places, of course, to make me think, whoa, what's Paul saying in Romans 9? This is radical, man. I couldn't wrap my head around this as a person who thought Jesus died for everyone. God wants everyone to be saved, yet he has all power. It made no sense if he's all powerful that he wanted to save everybody. And then I look at Paul and he goes, no, God does what he wills. In fact, before anyone was born, he's talking about Esau and Jacob. I loved Esau. I hated, and he hated. I remember as a Christian trying to say the term in Greek didn't mean hate. I mean, you find every type of reason to say, you didn't hate him, and then I found other verses where God abhors the workers of wickedness, and this is in Psalms 5:5, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, I remember these verses from debating other Christians. Took Calvinism so serious, I joined the Presbyterian Church. I would have joined a Baptist Calvinist church because it's more like a Baptist. I didn't know about infant baptism and sprinkling. I didn't know about a high church orthodoxy and stuff. I was more akin to Protestants, more akin to Baptist in a way. Became a Presbyterian, was so serious, started reading the Reformers, getting into the history, reading Puritan Reformers. Like, some of these people had some crazy ideas, but long story short, I'm learning about my faith, the Westminster Confession, and I join. I didn't know it was like, I thought it was like the other churches. I join, it's serious, it's a commitment to be part of this church. I didn't know that there was legal, like, you're really in something where they're sending you legal notes when you get excommunicated. Notice where I headed here. They're sending me a note saying you are not in the church anymore. And in the church is being in Christ, in these higher forms of Christianity. And it really made me go, what am I?
Was there a specific view that you were espousing that was so problematic?
Yes. The pastor himself actually encouraged me. I got to blame somebody. We can't blame ourselves for everything. I was curious about this thing we call eschatology. I wanted to understand the end times, second coming of Jesus. So I was a premill dispensationalist when I became a Reformed Calvinist. What that simply meant is that I'll give it real simple. Not all of them agreed. People who are watching this are premill probably think I strawman them. But the point is, if you've ever watched Tim LaHaye, the Left Behind series, The Rapture, and all that in the movies, it's like that. I had a form of something like that was going to happen. So he told me, you should read this book, A Case for Amillennialism. I did. And it convinced me that language doesn't always mean literally what it says. I'm the God of a cattle on 1,000 hills is the example that always stood out to me. So what if there's 1,001 hills? Is God still the God of that cattle? Well, duh. It's just it's a statement. And then I read like the 1,000-year reign, and I wondered if those words were literal, if those numbers were literal, are these symbolic? So you start to take an approach on the Bible that maybe it doesn't mean what it looks like it says. Makes your perception of it has to be deeper then in order to perceive the truth of what it's saying. So now it's not like face value. You read it and it says what it says. That's what the evangelical fundamentalist approach was for me. The Bible says what it says. And then they had this caveat, we want to know what it really means. So don't say we have to interpret everything literal. If the genre is something else, we will commit to the genre and then take that genre literally as that genre and interpret it. Everyone says that their methodology is correct and accurate, but amillennialism convinced me, but I was still in la-la land. I didn't quite wrap my head around this whole thing. Then I came across R.C. Sproul, Kenneth Gentry, Gary DeMar. They are what you call partial preterist. A preterist is someone who believes that something is fulfilled in the past. For example, if there was a prophecy, let's say that Christopher Columbus would find America before he came or after he came, and someone wrote it like he prophesied that he would find it, and it happened, you would say that that is a fulfillment of a prophecy. Yeah. You wouldn't pretend that that prophecy is talking about 2001 or 2020. It happened already, so we don't use it again.
Sorry, hey, Derek, sorry to interrupt. Can you mind just more getting to exactly what was the thing that you were saying you believe that was problematic?
Full preterism. So that's why I was leading up to from premill, amil, partial preterism, and everyone was cool with me being partial preterist. But then I found people say that Jesus returned in 70 AD online. I'm studying this. Yeah. This is heresy. Yeah. This is full on. This denies the resurrection of the saints in a physical body. So like everyone who's expecting to be resurrected in the end, this is orthodoxy. If you don't believe that, you are going against the creeds, which means you're going against the Christian church, which means according to the majority of Christians, you are not a Christian. You can't be. How can you deny the resurrection according to them? And everyone has a definition of what a Christian is. Christians can't even agree on who Christians are or aren't. Oftentimes it's, well, you don't accept, you're not one of us. And that happened a lot. So I'm a full preterist.
Has that cleared up for you in atheism?
No, atheists have the same problem in many respects to what you would call an official atheist or whatever. Like,
no. I'm just having fun with you.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, you're right, though. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's only Christians who had that problem. But I also don't wear atheism as a badge, like join me or you're in trouble. Like, no, I have Christian friends. I don't discourage them from, being religious if that's what they want. I can only speak. So you were.
Oh, sorry. So you were basically excommunicated, I guess, from this church or something. And then what happened then?
I was excommunicated because I was talking to other members about this doctrine, and literally having debates with the scripture, and they were being convinced. They couldn't deny what they were looking at the text. Jesus said. Did he lie? Well, you're stuck with a confrontation there of did Jesus lie or not? What are you going to do? C.S. Lewis said, well, if there's one thing Jesus got wrong, hold on, buddy. He's God in the flesh. How can God in the flesh get things wrong, right? And then people want to argue. This is where you get into this whole 100% man, 100% God. What is the dichotomy of God? Like, how is Jesus? And there were heresies of people saying that Jesus wasn't God, and there were heresies. He was only God, not man. I'm rabbit trailing to tell you, like, this was a problem. And I saw it, and the church confronted me with 5 elders. They brought me in, and they rebuked me. And they told me, don't speak. We don't want to hear what you have to say. You need to hear what we have to say. Immediately, I felt like I was not at home. I did not feel like this was a real journey for truth. They had the truth since the 1500s. They weren't searching. They had it, and I needed to bend the knee. I needed to accept this. And I realized right then, I'm not dealing with people who are seekers. These aren't people who are really on a pursuit of trying to find out what the accuracy is. These are people who are comfortable. Don't pop their bubble. Read those hymns from 17 whatever. Don't play music. You know, certain churches do, but I'm saying this was like only piano. They were trying to mimic the Puritans. Some of the women wore head coverings. What's that tell you about them? You know, they're old school. And I got excommunicated, so I left. My wife left. We left already because I started feeling uncomfortable, and then I had received this thing saying you're excommunicated. Well, why do you think I was excommunicated?
So was that the end for you of going to churches, or did you find another one?
I think I might have popped in and out of churches, like little here and there's, but there were more evangelical churches that weren't Presbyterian, high form type, strict churches. I never thought of going into liberal churches. That's the thing. I never thought that was an option because I took the Bible so seriously. I thought that I was always like frowning upon the idea of like being liberal about Jesus and relaxing off of him. I was so serious and devout about this that I couldn't approach this and be normal, like mediocre, like what liberal Christians are. Couldn't imagine it. I was very, I guess you could say, very conservative, also politically in all my thinking as well. So there's a tie-in there. But I ended up, after being excommunicated, was able to kind of search without boundaries, without taboos, without these are the boundaries you're allowed to seek in. And that led me down a rabbit trail of seeking ancient information, going to people I wasn't comfortable with 10 years ago when I was listening to Christopher Hitchens, as you mentioned before the show. Like, I hated that guy. I absolutely, actually hated him. I did not like him. I didn't like Richard Dawkins.
Spreading lies, or
absolutely. Oh, 100%. In fact, I thought this guy hates God.
What was the time frame roughly from your like sort of Pentecostal time you were describing? High school, I think it was, up to what you're describing now. How many years is that?
Oh, wow. So I've been married for 15 years. My wife is an eyewitness of all of this. I would say it was probably about 6 to 8 years or so. Okay. From being like really charismatic and devout and then going into Reformed and then being excommunicated. I'd say anywhere from maybe 6 to 9 years.
And I think
so. You're mid-20s or something.
Yeah, I was going to say. I think he said this was after getting married that you went back to a Pentecostal church and then started evolving your views from.
Well, I didn't go back to a Pentecostal. Oh, okay. The timeline's a little.
The speaking.
It's fine. It's fine.
Anyway, so it doesn't. The timeline's not that crucial. It's just wanted to get an idea.
So what were the factors then? What were the factors of this sort of? So now I guess you're essentially starting a deconversion phase. Is that what you're getting to?
Yeah, I didn't know it was. I had no clue. I thought I was getting closer to the truth of God. Mm-hmm. Every part of this process, till I faced something at one point, and we'll get into that, was I'm getting closer to the truth. And the truth is God in my mind, but understanding God had to change. Now, I couldn't hold on to this. There's no way to the Father except through the Son. Jesus is the answer, and he's the only way. And if you don't accept him, you're going to hell. Because then I did some comparative religion studies. I started seeing very common motifs. Common, basic, fundamental things among religions that any culture would teach. And I started going, well, hold on. Christianity, like if you ask a Christian, a fundamentalist, an evangelical, since I'm an exvangelical, where does love come from? It's God. And it's not just any God. It is literally my God who's giving you the love. So if you love your wife, I don't care if you're a Buddhist, a Hindu, whatever, like that's God that's actually giving you what you have. So you need to thank him. One day you'll meet him anyway. Don't worry, every knee shall bow. You will face him one day. But anyway, getting back to the point, you can't love without it being my God. Not your gods, my God. There was no universal principle of saying the 6 wise men of Hindustan to learning much inclined. They all went to see the elephant, and all of them were blind, that each might satisfy their mind. And they're all approaching God, not really knowing what it is. No, they know what it is. They know who it is, through who it is. And that's the evangelical bubble, which makes you against the world. The world, he who loves the world, the love of God is not in them. Read the pastoral epistles. So you start to see this extreme tight bubble expand and pop, and it becomes, no, God's bigger. This is what started happening to me when I saw these narratives, not in the literal sense.
How were you actually learning them? Like through YouTube videos or reading a book or what?
YouTube videos. I was combination of both, but I would watch some videos by Manly P. Hall. He was a very classic 32nd or 33rd degree Freemason who gave public lectures back in the 30s. And he's diving into this information that really blew my mind. I did not realize numerology. I didn't understand the significance of numbers and how they played a role in one, if you would imagine, the ancient and, of course, maybe contemporary mindset. Like the number 7, perfection. But why 7? Where's these numbers come from? Or why is there 365 days in a year? So I started tapping into calendar understandings of why did the ancients have a 360-day calendar, which is a holy calendar, and then a 365-day calendar. Where did the 5 days come from? And it comes down to a lot of numerology and their understanding of planetary alignments. They were into astrology. I started diving into things you wouldn't do as a Christian. Name the nearest Christian church that talks about astrology as understood by biblical authors. They don't. They go, no, you're supposed to stay away from. Stay away from. Yeah. Never learn. Don't go in and study this stuff. It's taboo. It's evil. They're spirits.
So at this point, your understanding of God is essentially that you can't. It's the exclusive sort of nature of Christianity. You've let go of that through this process. Is that right?
It started to crumble through this process. I started to realize, whoa. I started realizing the Mesopotamian flood myths, Enuma Elish. If it was so taboo, why are they aware of the narratives that come before? I used to believe the earth was young. I was a 7,000-year young earth creationist as a evangelical initially. Even into the Presbyterian church, I thought the earth was young. I was scientifically illiterate. I didn't know anything. I was told to stay away oftentimes from the first cult I was in. They said, don't go to those churches. They don't teach line upon line, precept upon precept. You're in a cult when they tell you don't even go to any other churches because ours is the only one. But that bubble started popping. I'll give you one analogy. I mentioned this before. Samson. 7 hairs of lock, 7 locks, if you will, dreadlocks for hair. There's 7 days in a week, right? You go, but so what? Where are you drawing these? Isn't that over comparison? His name means the sun. Literally, the sun. Small sun in Hebrew. He had 7 locks of hair. He has strength like no other, just like Hercules. Never thought to look at Hercules because he was not someone that you can believe or think is truly a hero of God. But they have their own myths and all this stuff. So I looked at Samson and realized, holy moly, Delilah is paid off in silver. Well, gold and silver. You have gold, which would represent the sun. Silver would represent the moon. And we know that they're Sabbath-keeping people. They would keep the Sabbath. There's a lunar and solar issue among calendars when you start looking into these problems. People don't even think to check this stuff out. This is not even on the, why does this matter, Derek? It matters because once you know what they were thinking and perceiving the Bible the way an ancient would have tried to, at least try to, because we can't get there completely. We don't have all the data. But when you do, you start to realize they didn't look at this stuff the same way we are today. I realized that the Christians weren't looking at this properly. They weren't really getting back to what it meant. They were saying, how does this matter to me? How's this applied to me in 2022 now? Ignoring its original context and how it meant to them and why it mattered to them, and it wasn't talking about us. Now, you want to glean wisdom from it? Sure. But Samson dying was the sun going into the winter solstice. So much so, darkness happens when the sun's going into the winter solstice. They gouged his eyes out. He can't see. He can't see. Darkness. But he rises again. The sun comes back. This is what happens every year. So I started to realize maybe these stories, I don't know what I'm looking at. And if you do that long enough, you start to realize some of the names of the patriarchs are actually derivatives from deities. You start to get into a rabbit hole that you have no clue exists. It is a matrix saying, do you want the blue pill and you want to go to sleep? And you just remain a Christian, stay in your bubble and tell everyone they're like the wind going to and fro, or eat the red pill and see how far the rabbit hole goes. But all I can offer you is the truth. That's what I did.
Did you ever stop in the middle of all that, I guess, and ponder whether maybe what you knew at the time was pretty... I mean, obviously there's serious scholars, biblical scholars, Christian and non-Christian, around the world. Mm-hmm. Did it occur to you that they might be aware of ways to read Samson, across, like there's how to interpret, what's called the field of hermeneutics. Mm-hmm. How did they understand these texts? How did they use them, and so on? That's a pretty complex phenomenon. Did it just occur to you at some point, like, I'm young enough, I haven't done that much work on this stuff, like serious work like people do when they study for years and stuff. I can't even read Hebrew. I'm guessing. And I'm not really into the primary sources. Did it just occur to you, maybe I just don't know enough to really draw any conclusions too strongly? Or did you, by the way, I say that knowing it's very hard to do that. I'm just asking, did you ever go through that at the time?
I didn't go
and
through
I know you...
Go ahead.
Answer that first, then I'll ask you a second question.
Yeah. I didn't go through, let me read every Christian academic to keep my faith bubble possible.
I didn't mean Christian academic. I meant academic,
I started to. That's actually what happened, which is why Myth Vision became born. I became more serious. See, even in those Samson means the sun and this and that may be potentially true. I don't even know if that's actually the truth. For a moment, I saw it and went, whoa, this is probably true. And because I started to learn a philosophy for myself. It is that I don't know philosophy, so I'll keep studying and keep learning. And I learned that I know that I don't know, and when someone tells me they know, I know to run from these people. And I'm saying from the fundamentalists who know the truth, and I know they've never even looked into any of this stuff. They're already, nope, that's not true. So I know that in my mind they were wrong.
But you must have known there's a lot of other people who wouldn't be fully like that. I mean, I'm not saying that. In other words, like you're just talking about Socrates, right? That's exactly what Socrates did.
Right.
I read Socrates when I was a young Christian and thought it was a great mentality, and it's hugely shaped the way I think of as a Christian. And there's a bunch of Christians, I think, that don't really generally approach life that way. But there's a bunch of Christians I know that I would say do tend to have a sort of provisional, more cautious attitude toward just believing whatever they're told. And so it must have occurred to you that that's true of some Christians too. It wasn't just sort of like all one side, everybody in this group is a cult or whatever. Everybody in this group never thinks critically, and everybody outside of it does, right?
No, I agree with you. I saw, for me, as I started to get into these never touched, I didn't really even hear like Christians who were liberal really get into some of these things. And if there were, and I'm sure there were some that get into some of this stuff, I didn't know about them. I had no way to access them, but I knew Manly P. Hall. I knew other woo-woo, I call them woo-woo, but they're like esotericists and things like that, which opened up other alternative interpretations that actually were closer to an ancient Near Eastern explanation than what Justin Martyr said about Genesis chapter 1, the Trinity, when he said, let us make... Hold on. I already knew that was a red flag. Like, sure, I know that Christians think it's the Trinity talking in Genesis 1. Not all, by the way. Michael Heiser doesn't. I didn't know that. But I started looking into these academics and realizing other people take different positions. But I had a distaste. For, like, I'm going to approach Christians when Christians themselves aren't listening to the words of Jesus. They can't even get this parousia correct. Like, Jesus said...
Yeah. Was your thought at that, sorry to interrupt, was your thought in those, if you can remember it, at that time, that sort of the people outside of Christianity, who maybe I guess I would say were either non-religious or maybe liberal in their sort of religious ideas, would by contrast be a more I could trust these people, but not the ones I came from?
I would say definitely not the people I came from.
Yeah, I meant that. By contrast, did you feel like, okay, I'm now trusting these people that are outside of Christianity? I distrust the...
Yes, I felt like the people I was starting to approach were far more flexible, less dogmatic, more ambiguous in many respects, and then some of them were dogmatic. You find that out after a while of getting to know these people. And once again, I move away from that. I move away from some of them. So this is what happens as I kept journeying, learning. The more education I did have, the more I learned, the more I realized. And now it's kind of full circle in some respects. And what I mean is, I don't interview apologists expecting to like get something that's going to blow my mind and make me come back to Christianity. It's just not happened. I watch them often. I see debates happen. But I go to certain academics who are Christian, like Del C. Allison Jr. and others. Got his commentary right here, actually, while I've been writing this article for Bart Ehrman. And, I go to certain Christians, but I've asked him in person. I've sat in his house at Princeton University, where his house is like a 4-story home. It's beautiful. And I said, Del, honestly, though, why? Why do you believe? He says, Derek, I had an experience in 1970-something. And I felt so comfortable from that, because he told me the truth. And the truth wasn't, this is provable. I can go and show this to anybody and they'll believe. This is facts. This is absolute history, and I know this is true. None of that. He said, Derek, I had a personal experience, and I can't reconcile what it is. And I'm not willing to say it's hallucination. So I said, I respect you for that. Your honesty made me even more comfortable in recognizing that. But people who run around acting like opening the New Testament, you can put this on other people and you can prove that it is true. That's what really started to raise red flags. So I don't go back to them for I'm going to learn something as if they have something I haven't heard. I was in the apologist circles. William Lane Craig, Ravi Zacharias, all of these people, including Mike Lacona that I recently interviewed on my channel. I used to listen to them for years. And they gave me all the ammunition to keep my bubble tight. So I moved on from them as I was deconverting, because some of them would say there are no contradictions in the Bible. Some of these esotericists would rationalize issues and problems by saying that's an allegory. No, that doesn't contradict. And one of my co-hosts on Myth Vision was that person. Just to give you an example, Luther G. Williams is a great guy, wonderful guy. He stopped wanting to get on the show with me. And I think I was going in areas he wasn't comfortable going in, and we'd have conversations about the New Testament. And I'd say, hey, there's some serious contradictions between... No, they're not contradictions. They're not problems. What are they? And he would rationalize these things. And I started to find out as I dug deeper, no, these are... If you're trying to act like these are telling the same account, they cannot be. These are different authors, if you're using one to compare to the other. They are multiple authors with different agendas, writing different literary compositions. You can't. Trying to force the square peg through the round hole is what I saw them doing. So I parted ways and started seeing problems. And then science. Started taking science more seriously. And when I say science, I mean evolution. I didn't believe we evolved. The Earth was 7,000 years old. It took me some time to start thinking, hold on, maybe these biologists and anthropologists and all these fields of study actually know what they're talking about.
And you weren't aware that there were biologos? You weren't aware of that? Have you heard biologos still today?
Yes, and they take a theistic evolution approach. And I did not see where in the Bible I saw their arguments, and I'm like some of them I think are trying to reconcile the Bible to science. Now, others who try to say, look, the Bible's not a science book. That's a better approach, but it does make some claims. The Bible makes some claims.
I take it you learned about them later versus what your experience was.
I learned about them over time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. That wasn't an option in my mind to say, okay, the 7 days of creation are really epochs of millennia of who knows how many hundreds of millions of years, and then man evolves to the state where finally Adam's there, and then God finally decides that some man 7,000 years ago, which we've existed in this form for a couple 100,000 years, to go, Now you have my pneuma. You have my spirit. You have my consciousness now. It's like, what? It was weird.
I don't want to cut you off or anything, but just so we can have a little discussion about it, I just kind of want to get to the end of your or get up to speed to where you are at present. And I think you're kind of there, right? Like you've basically that you saw the similarities between the Bible stories and mythical stories, and you're basically drinking from the fire hose of just all this new knowledge, and you said, I cannot keep my Christian faith. And does that pretty much lead to where we are now? Is that pretty much your... I mean, I know you describe yourself obviously as an atheist, but is there another tweak that you've had since then?
I would just get to Jesus. I would just get to Jesus at that point. And I would say what we've been told, we should be very cautious. There's far more to investigate than what we've been just said, that this literal guy is just, walking around. Everything that we see in the Gospels is factual history, and that it's teaching this is the truth, and it's actually teaching this, and that this is unique, that no one dies and rises from the dead. Like, all of these things are not true. People died and rose again in many motifs, in various mythologies. In contemporary Greco-Roman culture, their deities were like this. And I started to learn these things and go, what the heck is going on? Dionysus turns water into wine. He's the true vine, just like Jesus is in John. And I mean, look, it goes on and on and on and on. And when I saw that, and I keep seeing it, and I learn new things every day, it just solidifies even more of my appreciation for the human thumbprint and the ingenious development. I see religion now as an evolutionary product of human history. Just like we evolved, I think the idea and the idea of religion itself is an evolutionary byproduct of survival, of civilizations growing with laws, etc., and how we came to be where we are. And I wouldn't pull the plug just to say it now that I'm an atheist and I don't think that these are true. There could be a God. That tells you I'm not a metaphysical atheist, or a being, whatever you want to call it. There could be something there. But I don't start with there being something there, because when you finally rolled over 9 out of 10 stones and you found out their origins or how they've developed or where they come from or all of these types of things, you get to the 10th, and though we don't have it, it takes a God of the gaps argument to come to the conclusion. I don't assume deity. I pause. I think we should all say, at the very least on this, I'm agnostic. I don't know. But I lean in the direction of thinking 9 out of 10, give me the reason why there really is. And then, if I have that evidence, I'll go that route. But I start with caution.
Is a creator, you mean, like at all?
A creator at all. Because, Spinoza's deity is not ridiculous.
Gotcha.
I don't see it as a ridiculous notion at all.
It's interesting. It's different from the way I guess I lost my faith in more of a point for point kind of analysis. Is for you saw this sort of broader picture, and you just couldn't sort of believe that it was anything more than man-made, is what it sounds like. Is if I had to, I know I'm summarizing, but that seems like where you...
It was that, or everybody's religions were God-made, because it started looking like everyone else's. All of these, I couldn't be special pleading anymore. You're going to tell me all of these religions are... This walks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a duck, smells like a duck, looks like a duck. It's not a duck?
Did you ask yourself the question, are all religions true? Or was it... Okay.
Yes. That was that journey before I hit the wall of like, there's a problem here. God was so complex and bigger, I became kind of a pantheist in a way. Like, all is energy or all is God, like kind of a woo-woo esotericist, like I said, where like it's the 6 wise men of Hindustan.
Yeah, right.
Everybody's touching it, and we're all blind, but we're all touching it. And it's consciousness, and it is.
Yeah,
like,
I'm curious.
I started dabbling into
what
these.
The step was to get from that view to no, they're all just myths.
Well, from that view to say they're all myths, I started to believe they were mythology and believed that there was this deity that was bigger. I couldn't let go of the God idea. I was scared of like letting go of that experience that I had in that church that day, that something had to do this. I couldn't let go of that. And then that's when I really started looking into science. And I wanted to ask questions. So I interviewed, there's biologists. I have a psychologist friend of mine who has written a book called Why We Believe in Gods. And he goes into the science behind the chemicals in our brain, even like the reactions and experiences that we have, like all of this. And he talks about the evolutionary development of our survival as tribes, how we even had natural ways to relieve pain through dancing and singing, and it would release endorphins and all these chemical imbalances. And I thought, that's exactly what I was going through in church.
Gotcha.
And
so it was almost this
you get a high
other
from
layer
it,
of anthropological, just sort of, human psychology and such that came into the picture to sort of take you to that next step.
A juxtaposition that's kind of interesting is I'm late 1980s, atheist, very inquisitive and sort of philosophical on the side. Not to be confused with being smart, but just curious. And religion, to me, religion was hypocrisy and people on TV asking for money, and I had no interest in it through late elementary, middle school, high school. And when I got into college, I was interested in evolution and sort of debunking the people who were religious around me, because religious usually just means Christian most of the time, in America. So I was arguing with all these people very, very energetically and, trying to deconvert people, I guess. And I remember I was reading I decided to do some work on evolution, and this is just go to the library, this was at the Air Force Academy, and just try and learn from books, what the scientists were saying about evolution. And a couple of the authors of the books really went out of their way to bash Christians, Genesis and so on. And it's interesting, the impression it left on me was it's like it's essentially the same thing you were going through it in reverse. I thought, they don't need, I'm interested in the science. I could care less of what their opinions were of religious people. And it bothered me that they spent so much ink just sort of bashing religious people and the religious worldview, because in my mind it was like I just wanted the science. So that was actually the first real seeds of doubt for me about the non-religious world not being always trustworthy, not being always of goodwill. And it really sort of rocked me that it didn't strike me that these people were as interested in the truth as I felt like I was. That they were just more, I guess, it seemed like they were as interested in just sort of bashing the alternative view. And I, at the time, it wasn't like I was on their side. Like I was, in other words, I wasn't like looking to prove them wrong. I was looking for ammunition, and it bothered me that they were doing this. And it did have a kind of shattering effect. And I met some people, again, this is no internet or anything. I met some people who really believed. They weren't sort of religious hypocrites, I didn't think. They seemed like they really believed this stuff. And they seemed honest and humble and seemed to, I guess I don't know Dale Allison that well, but it had that effect on me anyway, that they seemed honest and fairly transparent. And even though they were definitely, convinced they were right. So it's just interesting to me that a similar sort of psychological, whatever you want to say, trajectory, but in two different directions. And I think that happens, that where people, because Christianity is so totalizing, it's such an all-encompassing, all-comprehensive worldview that it's like that black thing in 2001, Space Odyssey or whatever, of the monolith. It's like whatever it is. It's just so. It's like. People are rarely just neutral about it, I guess I should say. I have a question for you about how you feel about, like, in the non sort of religious world, the issue of something like transgender. Like for me and my Christian friends, like it used to be, I would hear that the non-Christian world criticize the Christian world for things like young earth creationism, and I thought it was pretty fair criticism. Like this is totally... they're just not looking at the evidence or whatever. Right. I would now say that's true of the non-Christian world regarding things like sexual identity, gender identity, and stuff. Like, that seems obviously nonsense to me. It's just not scientific. And I think Christians see that pretty clearly. But it seems to me like the non-Christian world seems way more drifty on that. And suddenly science doesn't seem so obvious. So I'm just wondering how you sort of, do you view it that way, or do you think that's a totally separate sort of thing? We don't need to talk real long about that. I'm just curious here.
It gets, obviously I try to remain apolitical. I don't really get into politics on my channel.
Yeah, this is science, I guess, not politics to me. But
yeah. I mean, but it is a question worth asking, because I know some atheists who are being kind of excommunicated right now from the atheist community, because they have taken stances. They have friends that are trans. They have friends that are gay. They're friends with people who are literally staunch communist, and they're friends with them. They don't see their friendship based on these things. The problem, one of them has gone on record saying, is he doesn't believe that counselors in churches, for example, or people in powerful spots over children, over the youth, should be steering children in the direction of sex change or hormonal things, all of this stuff, where you don't know what you are. I am not a scientist. I don't know the science behind this. I know Richard Dawkins caught some crap for making a statement, I guess, a while back. Not a biologist, so take me as an ignorant fool who has anything to say on this. But this is my thing. I'm a little, and maybe it's because I only live in this body. I like the opposite sex. I identify as a man. I grew up in the South. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Like, that's been my whole life. And maybe that's just me. But I think it's odd, and it's just me maybe, to look at a child who was born with a penis and balls and say, you don't know what you are and I don't know what you are. You'll figure it out when you're 3 or 4 or 5 and choose, and then we will cause you to be what you decide, what you want to be. And it's just weird. It's strange to me. I'm not used to that. So I don't really know as far as what is okay and right. If they're a full-grown adult, this is my personal opinion. If this is them, they're adults, they know what they're doing, and this is the decision they want to make because this is what they want. Sure. I also think it's wrong if a youth is giving off that they're gay, or they're giving off this idea that they don't feel that they are who they are in their skin, to have people constantly attack them or make them feel like they aren't what they're acting like they are. Is it social pressures? Is this a genetic thing? Is there something else that we just don't know yet, or we maybe do know, but people aren't speaking about? I don't know. But I had friends that were gay their whole life. They never said it. And then they eventually married their now husband. And he was best friend of mine. He gave off the vibes, and we used to be funny and mock him about it, especially when I was a Christian. And we had these ideas that you're going to hell if you are. Just so you know, Paul said, men with men, working that which is unseemly, burn in their lust one toward another, and women with women, leaving the natural body, Romans chapter 1. We believe that you're going to hell. So you have to hide it if you're religious and you think that way. So I wonder if it's reactionary, and it's almost like testing the boundaries socially. We learn as we go. I think morals also evolve with us, but that's a whole different discussion. But nonetheless,
so let me respond to that just real quickly, because I would think, like earlier when we were talking about 7,000-year-old Earth or whatever,
right?
I think you would agree that'd be a point of like a pretty easy mockery in the non-Christian world.
Yeah.
Like the people who are young Earth creationists are easily mocked. But people don't talk then as if, hey, I'm not a scientist. I can't really pontificate on this. I shouldn't be the one. In that context, people suddenly are really confident scientists. They know geology so well, they could virtually themselves give the evidence of how we exactly know how old the Earth is. But when it comes to something like sexual identity, which I think for the Christian side of this is like the science is way easier, It's not even that complicated to understand. The XY chromosome thing is about as simple as it gets. Most people even know that by middle school or middle school. And so there's really no reason to hedge at that point as if, hey, I'm not a scientist. Like that seems way easier. The understanding comes a lot easier, not to mention intuition, common sense experience and stuff, compared to like the geological arguments of the formation of the Earth and so on.
I didn't think Derek really hedged. I thought he did a pretty good job of identifying that the gray area is really just, what to do with
it's
someone
more of a
who's
social
not an
thing,
adult.
it seems.
You know, how to handle that. I mean, I don't think anybody really has any problem with adults deciding to make a change, but no one really.
Well, how about we go back then to the exvangelical thing, because I'm really interested in sort of how your current, like, I usually find for me that we talk about things like this. Drew and I have talked, of course, for years and years, but it's like I need time to just go read, process myself, trying to work through all these things, because they're really difficult. If you're really trying to get at the truth, it's very humbling. It's not easy. It takes layers of thinking. It's a lot of realizing, hey, I just was wrong about that,
Right.
And I'm wondering what's that like for you now when you're trying to do, I think you do a lot of videos, podcasts, you're talking to a lot of people. And so what is that like now for you?
I'm very tentative in what I do. Just one comment. I want to make one comment about the thing before. The reason why I don't, I have not read the articles pertaining to this whole identity thing, but they're saying there's a lot more to it than just XY chromosome situation here. So this is why I'm like, I don't know. I haven't studied into this. It's been something I have avoided because I'm focusing on totally other things. I live in a binary world where I'm from. Like I said, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. If someone was born a hermaphrodite or something, or they just, I've never experienced that. I don't know that kind of world of people in between or anything like that. A woman who's born with a penis or something. Like, there's some oddities in science, in nature, that happen. And so there's a lot more to it, I know, from talking to friends of mine who say, like, if you're going to get into this, you need to get into this. Like, you actually need to look at this and study behind this and all that. But I haven't. So that's why I want to make that comment.
I understand. I appreciate that. And I think you can understand. I'm speaking on the side of the Christian, that what it sounds like to my Christian ears is that there's this mass, just in the same way you all would rightfully say, Christians feel confined, constricted by their biblical doctrines, that they have to sort of agree or at least give lip service to certain things, which I think is true. I think the same is true for you guys on something like this. There's a constriction.
I don't. Actually, I don't.
Well, let me explain. I don't think it's nearly as complex an issue, and the attempt to complexify it is just a way of trying to avoid the obvious. The evidence is way more obvious. Yeah, that this.
I'd like to ask you, why are people doing it then? Why are people actually thinking that they're men when they're women, or if they're women then they're men? What is the real cause behind them feeling that way or doing those things? Because I don't think you have to listening.
I think it's a really good question, but I don't think you have to be able to answer that in order to account for the science of XY chromosomes. Like that, I agree with you that identity can transcend biology. I just don't think it's untethered from it. And I don't think that's a difficult scientific question. And I think it's only the cultural pressures that are obscuring the obvious science, And I'm just pointing it out as, look, I'm conceding there's areas where Christians are constricted by their doctrine to feel they should agree to certain things. I feel that way for sure. And so there's a discomfort in certain discussions I'm not going to feel.
What is it that you think we're inclined to agree on?
Say that again. Oh, on the idea that just like the Christians have certain constrictions that are guiding their thinking, you guys have the same thing outside of Christianity. It's not as though you're truly sort of free thinking.
In the transgender issue.
I was only going back to the original way, Derek, you were talking about when you started to say, I'm not a scientist, you started by that. And I thought...
and the reason I said that is there's an article that I began to read that is trying to take it into the science realm and express there is more to this scientifically than I don't know. And I wonder if the opposition to this idea of the trans movement and people who are saying that they're not, their identifications are different, is that they haven't read maybe some of the science behind this. I haven't. So, like I said, my world is binary. That's the world I live in. It's the world I am. It's what I understand. It's what I understand. But I also haven't explored this with geneticists and studied behind this in depth and looked into the science behind that. I have looked into why the Earth isn't flat or why the Earth isn't 7,000 years old. I have looked into that, but I haven't delved into the science behind this, because it hasn't been an issue for me. I mean, you're the first person who's ever actually pressed in the past 2 years and asking me this particular question. I have friends that are trans. I have friends who are gay. I don't judge them. I don't quite understand them because I'm not them. But I love them nonetheless, and I love my Christian friends. I try to keep that philosophy. But
yeah, I think Drew, you see, maybe Drew, you're catching where I'm coming from. I'm just saying how a Christian would look at this would be just that just what I said. I don't really need to add to it.
But my question is in that, and you bring up a good point. Is the Christian coming from a know-all, or is it just from for example, we do things in nature that come totally natural to us. Society has always been binary. It's man with woman. In fact, at one point, it was wrong to marry a black person if you're white. Okay, then eventually that social construct breaks down and we find a way to evolve past those boundaries. Why? Because some of them would read their Bible and realize, well, the Bible says, stick with your own kind, do not mix seed, whatever. And there's people who interpret this in weird ways. I'm just giving you one example. British Israelites did this. Christian Identity does this. Other people do this kind of stuff. Black Hebrew Israelites, you name it. There's a lot of people who do this. Different identity groups. My point is the Christian coming from a know-all and they actually know why, and it's a justified, hey, we know that this is ridiculous, or are they actually reading geneticists and study this stuff? I haven't, so I'm coming from ignorance to say, is the Christian right in making these judgment claims without actually investigating behind that in the science? That is why I would say I'd be cautious to make any judgment claim on this without actually investigating how nuanced and maybe how detailed this actually gets into the strangeness of human genetics and how we are. It's easy to just say X, Y, chromosome this, chromosome that. I am not a geneticist. I don't know. I don't pretend to know why. There may be some complexity to this that I don't know. A Christian might say, I think there's a conspiracy here to say that there's a social movement forcing the scientists to assume there's more to this than what meets the eye. Unless you are a geneticist who's making these type of things, or you are that scientist who actually knows these claims, or you have deeply investigated this stuff yourself, I wouldn't draw those conclusions. That's why I'm very tentative, and I might hedge some things in saying, I don't know, and I don't want to pretend to know, because I could be wrong. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
To answer your question,
I think I disagree, Bill. I think a lot of Christians would say the same thing Derek has just said. You don't think so? I think most.
No,
most people would say
no.
It's.
But I'm not speaking. But I don't speak for all of them. So.
But I don't know the. I think.
I can only give what my hunch is. I could be wrong. And I don't. And I know to answer his question directly, Derek. I don't think that people know the science that well of either geology or genetics, because these are highly complex phenomena in one sense. But I think for most people, the sort of the biology of sex is a pretty simple phenomenon. It's not as complex. And so I think most people are able to cite that pretty quickly from their physical science 8th grade or whatever class, And I don't think that they've discovered there's something beyond that to alter that fundamentally.
See,
not
that's
the science
what I heard
anyway.
Derek
So that's
saying.
all.
I just thought he was being humble about it. That's the only.
Well, let's go. Because I don't want to just keep talking about that, but we can go on to the other thing of
you
what,
asked
just to
me something.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask about.
It, though.
That's okay. I wanted to ask about the.
We bring here is just put you on the spot.
No, you can keep talking. I actually, to be clear, it's not like I'm saying that you guys are in any way inferior. My point is, I think the same phenomenon happens to the Christian and the non-Christian. It was my point. That was it. And I don't think I think my Christian friends will listen to this and say, yeah, I think Bill's basically right about that. I think most will. I could be wrong. Who knows? But what I was going to ask you, and maybe we can just wrap up with this, was just sort of how your current search, how you work through, you want to read for yourself, you want to look at things, that takes some time to process what you really think. And I'm guessing you talk a lot to people. So what does that look like? How do you feel like that works well? Do you wish you had more downtime? What is that like?
Oh yeah, I do. I do wish I had some more downtime. But I put myself into this corner. I actually put myself into this kind of predicament by being so proactive. Let me just mention my work ethic is insane. I came from a military household, militant in everything I do, was just outstanding when I worked for other people the way that I worked, and I applied that ethic to what I do here at Myth Vision. This actually did this podcast while I was working full time doing hardcore laboring. I was doing renewable energy as a manager and stuff. So anyway, what happened along that way? If everything I described to you, I started to build what I think were some tools to help me get down into a worldview of, it's a bias that I've developed. I've developed a bias by looking at the data. Just like if you were looking at certain people in a certain culture that were doing a lot of bad things, you might develop a bias against these people going, they keep doing this. Something's wrong here with these people or whatever. I started to realize there's a lot in religious studies that made me see an anthropomorphized way, or if I could use a better term, anthropological approach. What is the human origin to this? I always wanted to find out God behind this. God did that. You just assume, because a lot of these narratives say it. Jesus rose from the dead. It took a miracle to do this. This is the Christian claim. He rose from the dead. In fact, God raised Jesus from the dead. So Jesus didn't raise himself. God raised Jesus from the dead. First, you need to know there's a God. And you need to substantiate that there's a God. Or you can start with, well, I believe Jesus rose from the dead, and this is evidence to me that I think there's a God. But Paul didn't start that way. Paul looked at the natural world. So I'm giving you kind of a rough here to tell you how I check myself in these things. Is I don't check my foundations until Jesus appears to me, says, Phil, okay, touch. And I know I'm not hallucinating. And he reveals that to me. I'm convinced at this point we're dealing with literature, and we're dealing with people in a time who thought everything was encompassed by an archon, a demon. There were spirits everywhere. A lot of the fundamentalist Christian churches that I was part of early on thought that way. I burned my Pokemon cards before I knew they were worth any money. This is a true story. I had Charizards. I had all of those amazing Pokemon worth who knows how much money. Burned them because they had demons or spirits. I burned my Mudvayne and my Slipknot heavy metal CDs because they were demonic and evil and they brought spirits. I really did all of this when I was younger. And I grew out of that, started enjoying Led Zeppelin and AC/DC, and I started to really enjoy my rock and roll and not like think, oh, is this okay with Jesus? You kind of grow up. All of those tools that I developed, I start with a premise that what is the natural explanation behind this? If a person started convulsing on the ground, you're not going to run to the hospital and go, is it Beelzebub? Is this Zeus? Who's controlling? You're going to think, what is it? Is this shock? Did they have a seizure? A natural cause. I start with what are the best natural causes for these things without coming at them thinking this is supernatural. The Christian has a supernatural worldview. I've deconstructed mine, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know where to go other than...
I guess you're a naturalist at that point, more or less a naturalist.
More or less. I mean, not an omniscient naturalist, but definitely somebody who... thinks that that's the best explanation.
Yeah. It seems to me like, and maybe you guys would disagree with me, or maybe you need to define this, but it feels pretty dogmatic to me, what you're saying. And I don't mean that you're wrong. That doesn't means you're wrong. But you sound pretty confident, pretty convinced that essentially naturalism is right. And when you say I'm not omniscient, I think, I sort of feel similar on the other side. Like I'm confident. I think it's true what I believe. I'm certainly not omniscient by definition within my theological framework. But what's any comment there, Drew? Because I know we need to wrap up. But a sort of final comment.
I get what you're saying. I think because Derek is passionate about this stuff, and but I kind of see. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but for me, it's a lot of these things seem to be what I feel I can rule out. And I would agree with him to his point that you can't necessarily rule out a creator, but he's sort of systematically or not, he's trying to sort of take down or weigh the things that he used to believe and see if they hold up. And so I think that's what we all do. And for you, Bill, you have been able to make them hold up. And for Derek and for me, we haven't.
Mm-hmm. Derek, you want your final word, Derek, on it?
Yeah, this is like where I think the rubber kind of hits the road for me, and this is just me. Now, I understand where you're coming from being where I was, and you understand where I'm coming from when I say this. For me, it's practical. Naturalism is every day. It is what we do. It's what we live in. I don't see angels flying down. I'm reading this book. I know what it says. I don't see people with missing arms growing back, dead people rising from the grave. I don't see these miracles that are claimed happening. It is from my experience that I have to determine what seems to be the most plausible. And as someone who took this so serious that I was willing to take the words of Christ, as they say, you need to be willing to hate your mother and father. Well, hate doesn't mean hate. Well, let's read what other people who are leaders of a movement said about these things. And they said very similar things, but we don't go out of our way to try and say that's not what they meant. But we do that with Jesus because it's special. We can't have him saying these things because if we have him saying those things, they don't look pretty for our movement or for my belief. And I don't see Jesus like that. He loves everyone and he wishes everyone is saved. There's a lot of this that I see happening. And I just live my day every day. I stopped for a moment being so superstitious and thinking Mudvayne had demons inside the CD tape and that Pokemon cards really would cause curses on my family. And if you step on a crack, you break your mama's back. These kind of supernatural, weird, superstitious ideas that we have. I stopped thinking those were true because none of them actually came true. None of them were practical. None of them made sense in reality in the experience that I have in the world around me. And I just took it another step and go, why do people today still believe this? And when we find out all of these people who make these claims, they're either unfalsifiable or they're falsifiable, and it shows that there's a con behind it. When you see that 1,000 times there's a con man making these assumptions, and over and over, that starts to paint a picture for you. Is this really true? And if it is, why isn't it happening to me? Why aren't I convinced? Why has it not? It's not that I wouldn't if it actually happened, but I'm being as honest as I can with my own experience to come to these conclusions. And I hope that helps some. I don't know if that did or not.
Great. No, thank you for that. I think it's a good final answer. And we're in total agreement. There's a lot of cons in the world from all sorts of corners. So I agree with you there. I don't think the divide's we don't need to discuss that very much. I think it's pretty clear where we all divide, and really enjoyed having you, Derek.
Thanks, Derek.
And hope to have you again from Myth Vision. And I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic. Thanks for listening.
The Divide is produced by Alan and Ben Hawbrooks and edited by John Workman. Dalton Reed handles IT. Join us for further discussion on this topic at our subreddit, TheDividebyiPUB. To learn more about other episodes and who we are, check out ipub.org/thedivide. See you next time on The Divide.